Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wine Guild. I'm so happy to see you join me this evening for tonight's story. But before it's story time, obviously, we need to light the candle because that signals ghost story time. And tonight's story is a story about ghosts, but also a story of revenge. And before we can get into the story, we need to talk a little bit about the history of the time period. Now, our story is going to take place in the 1930s during the Depression. Now, the Depression hit the United States pretty hard, and it hit all walks of life, from the poorest to the richest. And our story is going to be about a family that was one of the richest until the crash of 1929 did them severe damage and really put them in desperate straits. The Wade family was a very well-to-do family in the Boston, New England area, with roots going back to just about after the Mayflower. And some would say that the Wade's wealth came from a few nefarious sources over decades of time in the United States, getting into things that at a minimum or at the least would be unethical, and at the other end would be criminal and evil. Now, our story begins in 1933, which was the height of the Depression. And things have gotten pretty bad for the Wade family. In fact, John Cabot Wade, who was the heir to that family, got himself into a bit of financial trouble, actually a lot of financial trouble. In fact, the Wade fortune was just about gone, which put the Cabots in a desperate situation. And John Cabot decided to roll the dice and do something extraordinary to try to regain the fortune for his family. Now, the Wade family had an ancestor by the name of Ebenezer Wade. And Ebenezer had done a lot of things over the years and did a lot of seafaring. In fact, the Wade family still had a ship that was owned by them, mortgaged, but owned by them. Now, John, in going through the old logs of Ebenezer, found an entry that talked of something called black gold. And this log entry stated that the black gold was hidden at the bottom of the ocean at specific coordinates that were detailed in the log. Now, whether this was true or whether this was fantasy, no one could really say. But John was willing to take a shot, and he chartered his ship, hired a captain and a diver to make way for that location and search for this lost treasure. Now, the coordinates in that log brought them somewhere down in the Caribbean between a few islands, really uncharted islands, and it was a strait between the two of them. Now, this location was not an easy one to find, but John had hired Captain Willis, who was an expert navigator, and he was pretty sure he could pinpoint the location. So in mid-November 1933, the ship took off out of Boston and headed towards the Caribbean. John took his fiancée, Evelyn, along with him, as well as his aunt, who still had some money and was willing to finance the effort. The trip down the coast was but a bit uneventful. They did not encounter any type of bad weather and actually got there in relatively quick time. Now, on the day that they made it to the location, it was a bit late in the day, and John was a bit nervous and a bit eager and was pushing the captain to do the diving immediately. But the captain wouldn't hear of it. The captain said it was too late, it was too dark, they could not effectively dive and find anything. But he was confident he found the spot, and they would anchor there, and in the morning, they would start the search. Now, Captain Willis, in order to find this location, had to look at the actual log entries. And in the process of doing such, looked further in through these papers and actually found out an entry that John Cabot may have missed, or at least didn't tell anyone about. Now, this entry talked about the cargo of the ship at the time the gold was placed there. And to Captain Willis's horror or surprise, it was a human cargo. Yes, old Ebenezer was running a slave ship. Now, Captain Willis brought this log entry to John's attention. And John's reaction at first was poo-poo. In fact, he said, "Are you trying to tell me that my ancestor was dumb enough to run slaves during the outlawed period?" He said, "You don't know the Wades. The Wades are too smart to do something like that. Yes, of course we sold slaves, but we wouldn't do it when it was outlawed. We only abided by the law." Now, Captain Willis wasn't moved by this at all, and in fact says, "Are you sure you want to go through with this? You know, that gold probably was earned by selling human beings." And John Cabot just laughed arrogantly and said, "So what? So what? My family made money the way they could. That's the way it was, and that's the way I am. Any way you can make money is a good way to make money." But Captain Willis turned to John at that point and said, "But I don't think you understand. This entry said he had to dump slaves, meaning he had to get rid of those slaves because a U.S. cutter was nearby." And that log entry read, "Here lies 6 fathom downs, 10 tons of black gold, and for this crime may God have mercy on my soul." And John scoffed again, saying, "Are you telling me that a Wade would throw money away like that by dumping slaves into the ocean? No way. You don't know our family. It would never happen." So at this point, Captain Willis said, "It's getting late. Very well. We'll continue in the morning." At this point, John took his leave of the captain and went up on deck to see his fiancée Evelyn, who was sitting on a chair watching the moon. It was a clear night, a bit of haze or fog along the ocean, but basically clear as day from the moonlight. What a great night for romance, John thought, as he joined his beautiful fiancée on the deck and spoke of the wonderful things the two would do together once he had the gold and his fortune rebuilt. And especially because he knew that Evelyn came from a very wealthy family, and her parents would not allow her to marry him if he was not wealthy as well. As the night went on, the two were enjoying each other, and then suddenly John stepped up and jumped a bit and said, "Did you see that?" And Evelyn said, "What? What are you talking about? Did you see that? It looked like a head come over the railing and then disappeared." Evelyn said, "I didn't see anything. Your nerves are getting the best of you. Sit back, relax with me. Let's make love. Let's enjoy the romantic evening together." And John did that. But then suddenly, John jerked completely up in a panic and started screaming. The look on his face was one of pure horror. All of the blood had rushed out. And he began to scream, "Evelyn, run, run, get the captain. I will hold them off as long as I can. Please run and get help." Evelyn jumped back from John at this point in pure shock. She couldn't believe what was happening. He was up and flailing his arms, throwing punches in the air, but nothing was there. She could see nothing at all. And John screamed again, "Run, Evelyn, run! There's many of them coming over, many of them! Come on, get help, get help!" And as he did that, she saw his fist punch the air and suddenly get stopped, as if something was there, but there was nothing but air. Evelyn screamed, "John, John, what's going on?" He said, "There's many of them, black men, coming for me, help, get help, get help." And with that, she saw something she could not believe. She saw John swirl around in midair as if he was being carried and tossed around back and forth. Now, Evelyn couldn't believe her eyes. She backed up even further as she saw John be whipped around and actually start to go towards the railing backwards to the point where his body was actually on the rails, trying to prevent itself from falling into the ocean. And with a blink of an eye, his legs went up, his arms went out, and he went over backwards, and a splash was heard into the ocean surface. Evelyn ran to the railing and looked over, saw nothing but the disturbed water in which he went in. He did not resurface. At this point, Evelyn ran to the captain. The captain came and his mates came with the best lights they could. They searched the water. A few men jumped in to check the water to see if they could find him, but he was nowhere to be found. Well, you can imagine Evelyn was a complete wreck and was demanding that the captain do something. But the captain, being the seasoned sailor that he was, knew there was absolutely nothing that could be done in the darkness. They could not illuminate the water. They could not find anything. So what the captain said to Evelyn was, "Listen, we're going to have to wait until morning. Hopefully he swam to one of the islands in the straits. We will do an effective search tomorrow, and if he's alive, we'll find him." So the morning light came, and as Captain Willis promised, they went into the water. The diver they had hired to find the gold put on his gear, and they set up the oxygen machine, pumping the air down as he went down to look for him. Evelyn was waited on bated breath as this was occurring. Now, the diving equipment at that time was pretty primitive, and Captain Willis did not have the state of the art, but he did his best. The diver put on the equipment and went down. And they had rigged up this system where he would pull on a rope at the point when he knew it was time to pull him back up. And they would continue the oxygen until that time. Well, the diver was down for about 15 minutes when the pulling occurred on the rope. And Captain Willis ordered his men to immediately pull up the diver. Now, as the diver came out of the water, they could all see, as he took his helmet off, the same look, or at least Evelyn recognized the same look that was in her fiancé's face just before he vanished. And the diver said, "Captain, get me out, get me out, get me out." And he was in a bit of a tizzy over this. And began to say, "You will not believe what I just saw. In fact, I cannot believe what I just saw." Well, Evan and the captain waited with bated breath for the diver to tell them what occurred. And he said, I found him. Well, the captain said, "Well, where is he? Where is he?" "Oh, he's down there, all right. He's down there. I could not believe it, though. He's down there, and he's piled on by about 20 skeletons. And the skeletons were all chained together." He said, "As I touched one of them, the skeleton kind of dissolved as if it was made out of paper. I guess it's so old, but it kind of fell apart. And then as I went along and I found John's body there was one skeleton that had his hands around John's neck. In fact, his fingers were deep inside his neck, and you could see the blood that was there as it pumped out a little at a time, whatever blood was left. It was a horrifying scene, the diver said. I'm never going back there again. But what about the gold? Evelyn asked the captain. And the captain turned to her and said, Gold, the captain said. John may have looked for gold, but the only thing he found was a slaver's justice. So the moral of this story is John Cabot Wade may have benefited from old Ebenezer's evil doings, but he also had to pay the price for it. Karma is a funny thing. Thanks for watching.